Hey everyone, it's Maddie, and today I'm going to be rereading the Gallagher Girls series by Ali Carter. I read the first book back in 2008, so it's been 10 years since I first picked up the series, and I've been meaning to reread it for the last couple of years, and now I'm finally feeling like it's time. In the last 80 minutes, I just read the first book, which is I'd Tell You I'd Love You, but Then I'd Have to Kill You, which introduces you to the Gallagher Academy, the main four characters, and tells the story of how Cammy manages to fall in love with a boy from the local town and kind of deceive her school into dating him whilst also completing operative missions. When I read this for the first time, I was really impressed by the voice and the way it was told. The style was quite similar to Percy Jackson in the way that it could be quite blasé about the really interesting and dangerous things the girls were doing. Although I'd say that this book does sit outside the main series, as it's like a prologue or a precursor to what's to come, because the other books in the series, if I can remember rightly, all have a stronger arc playing throughout them, especially the last three books. They feel more continuous, whereas this one definitely feels like a standalone, like you could read this story and be satisfied that you'd been in the world long enough to get to know them. I'm really excited to see the characters as they continue to grow throughout the series, because it's this book that I really remember just because the premise is so unique and intriguing, and the other books kind of blend into one probably because they feel like one big arc over 5 books. So I'm interested to see what my opinions of those are going to be and whether this is still my favourite in the series. Also throughout you get to know more of Cammy's friends, Bex, Liz and Macy. They play a stronger part in the later stories, whereas this is definitely just mostly about her. And Liz was always one of my favourites, and I think Macy, after reading this one, is retrospectively going to be a favourite of mine. In a way, there's something about the ending of this one that is quite underwhelming. Like, she falls in love with a boy called Josh, and then by the end it's just kind of over, and you realise that her spy life is more important to her than her normal girl life. I think this appealed to me so much as well because it was kind of similar to Hannah Montana. I just loved the double life plotline, and so maybe that's something I'm gonna have to write myself in the future because it's just such a pleasure. Almost exactly an hour later and I'm finished with Cross My Heart and Hope to Spy. This is where they introduce the Boys Academy of Spying Blackthorn Institute, and another male character and eventual love interest is introduced to the series, Zach. This is very similar to the first book in that they go on a few missions in and outside of the school and it feels very contained. The boys obviously introduce another part of this world and show you that there's more existing outside of the Gallagher Girls Academy, but it still very much feels like the beginning of the Harry Potter series where the evil hasn't quite crept in yet, as I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a villain, even though later in the series there definitely is. There are a lot of really iconic scenes in this one to me, like the ball where they all have to have a different identity and stick to it for the evening, and also when they're doing passes, so they have to pass a coin between like 15 different people, and Cammy sees Josh for the first time and Zach is kind of like her fake boyfriend. I just love that trope in any way it appears, and probably when I read this the first time I thought that Zach was like an amazing character, but reading it now he just feels like a very cookie cutter hot, typical YA male. He's really smarmy and kind of arrogant, constantly irritating Cammy with his mixed messages and inability to clearly communicate with her. There's obvious chemistry between them because they've got so much in common and you just want them to be together, but at the same time, I almost preferred Josh as a love interest. I thought that was a more interesting dynamic. Because Zach got introduced, it was at the detriment of the other girls in Cammy's class. I think later on he's less prominent, but I guess this was his introduction to the series. But I did like how some of the small seeds that were planted in the first book, particularly about Cammy's dad, became more prominent in this one as she starts to ask questions she's never asked before. Do I like this more than the first one is an interesting question. Honestly, they feel like two first books. Like I was saying, the first book reads quite like a standalone, or you could read this one as the first of the series if you wanted kind of more of an arc. Maybe you wouldn't understand the Josh references that come up in this, but he isn't really that prominent, so I'm just gonna have to read the third one and see what I think if a ranking becomes more clear in this series. The one thing I'll say about both of these books is that they include missions of tailing, and it kind of just makes me want to go out to a public place and pick a person to follow and see if they notice me, even though that's majorly creepy. It does make you wonder if you could survive in this spying environment. I just finished the third book, Don't Judge a Girl by Her Cover, and this is definitely taking place outside the Gallagher Academy as Cammy follows Macy on an election kind of
circle. I don't know how US politics works, but essentially she's going on a tour of the US and dangerous things happen to her at each stop. This is probably the most explosive beginning. The first chapter has quite a lot of action in it, and that's different from the first two books that are setting up the school year again. This time they're juniors rather than sophomores as they are in the first two books, and with that comes more knowledge. They get to go to sub-level 2 in the basement and learn more about covert operations, which makes them more equipped to deal with the threat of a secret circle that are after Macy because she's a descendant of Gillian Gallagher. As I said in a previous clip, I was expecting Macy to be one of my favourite characters, so I really liked seeing her play such a prominent role in this one. Who I was less pleased with though was Zach. He is now a -2 on the scale of good love interest because he's become one of those people that doesn't want Cammy to do what she's trained to do because it's unsafe and it's all very sexist and weird. Also, Cammy has a complex halfway through this that Zach doesn't want to kiss her or like sees that as a problem, that he's no longer romantically interested in her, even though that really isn't the case, but she's just so hung up on it. And I'm like, at this moment, I know you are a teenage girl and you're allowed to have those insecurities, but probably not when your best friend is being targeted by a terrorist group. Overall, I'd probably say that this is my least favourite. Well, I don't know, there's pros and cons to this one because obviously Macy plays a big part in it, but then Zach is a worse part of it, so it's kind of like tipping the scales a bit. I think that's just a general reflection of my taste in books that take place in boarding schools. It was the same with Harry Potter. I loved it when they were in Hogwarts like 100% of the time, and then as soon as they were drawn out of it in the later books as things got more serious, I became less invested because to me the boarding school element is where it's at. I want lessons all the time, even if they're repetitive. I want hijinks in dorm rooms. So when they're actually going out into the field, as it were, that's when it gets scary and real, and it's just not as fun. It's dramatic, but I don't get the same vibe when I'm reading it. Also, I think that the pacing of this third book really bothered me as they kept going back to school and then back out into the open, and Zach kept popping up multiple times, but each time they weren't really learning anything new, and they gain information exactly the same way in each book by just spying on a different member of Cammy's family. So I'm hoping that routine is broken in the fourth book because it was getting a little dry in this one. It's nearly 8 o'clock and I just finished Only the Good by Young, and oh my goodness, does it go from 0 to 100 in this one. So it turns out that a couple of people are double agents or double agents, and Cammy doesn't really know who to trust anymore. Zach's mysterious personality is probably at its height in this book. There are definite big things that he's keeping from her that could endanger her life, and essentially the whole world gets flipped on its head as they unravel more about the circle and who was involved and what that can mean for the future. They were definitely outside of the school for a lot of this, but in the grand scheme of things, school doesn't matter anymore. They have been trained for the outside world and it's time to use that training to survive. I'm really surprised that each book in this series has a very different tone from the previous one. I think this one had more of a thriller vibe to it, whereas the previous 3 were more lighthearted in comparison to this. I'm just a little bit nervous for what the next 2 books are going to be because the stakes just keep getting higher and higher as Cammy is put in more and more danger, and at this point the only way you think of the series ending is for Cammy just to die, to be killed. There's just so many things working against her at this point that it would be an absolute miracle if she survived. My favourite scene in this one was when all 4 girls worked to crack the codes to get down to the sub-levels that had been locked. They each played such an instrumental part in that. It was kind of like Harry, Ron and Hermione going to look for the Philosopher's Stone. Actually, there are quite a few Harry Potter parallels in this one without me realising it, but this time I'm definitely getting it as each year a new character is introduced as a teacher. At this point, Cammy has been targeted by terrorists and kidnapped multiple times, and you can definitely tell in her writing or in her voice now that she's suffering from some kind of PTSD from this. I mean, it would kind of be unrealistic if she went unfazed by all these dangerous things happening to her, but it's definitely changing her personality, and I think that plays into the different tone. Out of Sight, Out of Time does look significantly bigger than the other books in the series, but it's actually only 20 pages longer, so I'm sure I can read it just as quickly as the previous ones. But I'm really excited to read this one because I have a memorable previous reading experience of it. I took it to Germany on a holiday when it first came out. I remember waiting for it and then staying up late and keeping B up with the light on in our hotel room because I just had to finish it. And I remember feeling really unsettled by the end. I think there's some kind of like brainwashing or memory-based like trickery that goes on. So I'm anticipating that, and hopefully I won't be as freaked out as I can remember being when I first read this one. So let's dive in. So it's the next day now and I finished Out of Sight, Out of
time. I read the last 100 pages this morning, and that's where it got freaky, so I was kind of pleased I didn't read it before I went to bed last night, otherwise I probably would have had some pretty weird dreams. So I actually remembered quite a lot of this one, which was a big surprise. This is more of an international adventure for them as they go to England and Ireland and Rome a couple of times, because the book opens with Cammy waking up in a convent, not knowing what's happened to her for the last 4 months, and so the whole book is her piecing together what happened in that time, as they think that she was captured by the Circle and tortured not to remember. So I said that the previous book was like a thriller, and this one is definitely a psychological thriller, as guns are introduced as a weapon in this book, as that's something the Gallagher girls haven't come into contact yet, and Cammy somehow just knows how to use one, and she actually kills someone in this book, so this just solidifies that Cammy is a very different person from the start of the series. It's intriguing as the adventures get a little bit more adult as well, because obviously guns is something that you don't want to even think about children getting involved with. Their age and them growing up and just developing as the series go on is becoming clear. I almost want to call this one my favourite in the series, just because, again, it's so different from the others, but it's just so interesting having the pieces put together for you. Basically every single character is present in this one, whereas in the previous there were a few people missing. I could also see this one playing out as a movie a lot more than the others. I don't know why, probably because of the other locations. It just reminded me of a Lara Croft video game. So in this book, Cammy is definitely the hunted, but in the last book she becomes the hunter as they're trying to track down members of the Circle and put an end to things once and for all. Also, something I'd like to say about the series in general is that a lot of the conversations read like the last conversation those characters will be having with each other. So that can come across quite melodramatic, but it's also just the style of the book that really their lives are at stake for most of it. So really, I don't know if you can call it melodrama if it's actually real.
And here we are almost exactly 24 hours later. I have finally finished the Gallagher Girls series with United We Spy. It came out in 2013, so it's been 5 years since I finished the series, and it was really lovely, although this book more than any other book felt like either an episode of Kim Possible or Totally Spies. Just the missions that they were going on and the objectives that they had felt like something that you'd see in a cartoon. And also, throughout the whole series, I was wondering when we would address the fact that other boys went to Blackthorn Institute, not just Zach, and in this book the other two, Grant and Jonas, appear for about 5 pages, but really there's not enough closure on that for me to actually feel satisfied in knowing that that school is getting shut down, because it's terrible. But I really did like that the one loose end from the first book, when Cammy meets an agent when she's going out to meet Josh, he appears in this book and plays a really big role in it, so I was really satisfied by that thread launching the first and the 6th book together. I don't know where I'd rank this one in terms of the series, because it was nice seeing them do such like high stakes things of rescuing people, going to prisons, camping out, doing road trips, like being in a cave, like that scene from The Incredibles. Like that was all lots of fun, and this definitely felt like the epitome of the series, like everything you wanted in it was in this book. So as far as a finale goes, this was really impressive, but I definitely think that I enjoyed the first 2 books more. I guess it's kind of crazy that in the end a bunch of 18-year-olds are taking down this terrorist unit by themselves, and seeing them so isolated from adult help or the school was interesting as they really pulled together, because in the 5th book Cammy went a bit dark Harry and just wanted to say like, I'm going it alone, I don't need any of you, I don't want to put you in jeopardy, but throughout the series all of her friends were trying to convince her to take them with her because they're better together. That's why it's called United We Spy. So I really liked the element of found family that goes throughout the series too. So my closing thoughts on the whole series, that this was a really fun rereading experience. It's a series that I'd claimed to be one of my favourites for a very long time, but I hadn't reread them in a while, so now I can solidly say that it's still a really influential read for me, and I was just drawn back to my 13-year-old self when I was reading them. If you're interested in espionage, in thrillers, in just fun boarding school stories, then I definitely recommend you picking up the Gallagher Girls series if you haven't, and if you have, let me know which one is your favourite down in the comments, and kind of what you thought of the series as a whole. So thank you everyone so much for joining me on this rereading experience of the Gallagher Girls. I really hoped you enjoyed this video and look forward to Bee's reread of the Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo coming soon. We make bookish videos every week, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and you can follow us on social media on Twitter and Instagram. I'll potentially be doing a poll for my next rereading series. We'll see you next time.